I want to go back to George Soros and what we talked about, because the choice here between us is really clear. The options in front of us are start to rely on ourselves, start to do the right things ourselves, start to become more self-reliant, start to just follow your heart, do the right thing, or continue to listen to the so-called experts who I think are setting up a giant trap for all of us. We have Richard Poe. He is the co-author of Shadow Party, how Hillary Clinton in the 60s radicals seized control of the Democratic Party. He is also, his other co-author is David Horowitz, a man I greatly, greatly respect, and Richard Poe has done so much amazing work on George Soros. Can you tell me, Richard, first of all, why is no one looking into George Soros? Why is this class warfare on everybody else except for George Soros?
Glenn, I would suspect that what happened to you when you went after George Soros may have a lot to do with that, because probably if anybody on network television, you, when you were on Fox News, went after George Soros more thoroughly and more definitively, and giving a lot more details about his covert operations overseas, which is the part of the story that is usually not told. You did more of that than I think anyone has ever done on network television. And of course, I don't know the inside story like you do, but it appears to me, and I think it probably appears to a lot of people in the media and out of the media, that you got punished for that. Now, maybe that's not true, but that's how it looked.
No, I will tell you that
outside.
I think I paid a huge price for going after George Soros. But I ain't dead. And quite honestly, I thought that was an option. You go after, I've seen movies before, and I thought, if I die, I think I said on the air at one point, if I show up dead, check Soros. But I didn't die. I paid a huge price, but I'm going on, and I think we are. I mean, Richard, I believe we've spoken about what we're working on another expose of George Soros and what he's doing now. He's a guy who seems to either frighten everyone or control everyone. Am I wrong?
He has tremendous influence, and he is a very thin-skinned person by nature. I've observed, I've learned. And he seems to have a lot of powerful friends in the government, in the intelligence community, in all kinds of walks of life, and a great willingness to use his connections for personal ends. He does not like to be criticized, and I have been astonished in the few years that I've been taking little digs at him in my own little way. I have been astonished at the extent to which he will react when he's criticized, even if someone so small as little old me does
it's incredible.
He will react.
Yeah, he's very much like Barack Obama, who we have somebody on to talk about what happened yesterday at the airport with Barack Obama and Jan Brewer. These guys are so rarely criticized, they just don't know how to react. When somebody does it, it's like, they can't even believe it. I spoke earlier today that I think Soros, there's a chance that Soros is doing the end game here of the euro. You've studied him enough. I'm not sure this is the end game, but this is the beginning of a new phase, at least, with his currency crashing in Europe. Do you believe that or not?
I believe that Soros and his minions and his associates believe this is the end game. They want it to be the end game. Soros himself is 81 years old. He has been preparing for this moment his entire adult life. He predicted as far back as 1987 in his book, The Alchemy of Finance. He called for essentially for taking down the U.S. dollar as the global currency of choice. He said that it was time for the dollar to go and to be replaced by some other currency. This was back in 1987. This was a long time ago. So
he's a guy who has he said that he feels the United States is the biggest obstacle to peace and prosperity in the world. How long has he ever liked America? Has there ever been a point to where he wasn't an enemy of our life the way we see it?
I have to believe Mr. Soros himself, because he has written many times that he always disliked America. He has written in many places in his books and articles that the only reason he came to America from England was to make money, and that it was his plan when he came here. I believe it was in 1956 when he first came here to work on Wall Street. His plan was to work here a few years, make money, and then go back to the country that he really loves, which is England. And this was always his plan, he says.
But then he destroyed England's currency. What happened there?
Well, he did, but he had friends in high places in England who approved of what he was doing. There were people in England who were very, very happy when Mr. Soros and certain associates of his ganged up on the British pound in 1992 and caused essentially a devaluation and collapse of the British pound. There were many people in England who approved of that for various reasons, some because they themselves made money, some because who were actually conservatives or self-styled conservatives. Some such people said they approved of Soros and he should get a medal because by crashing the British pound, he prevented England from entering the Eurozone at that point, which was in preparation. So there were all kinds of people in the British establishment who had different feelings about it, but it was the average Englishman who lost, I believe, a fifth of his savings through that devaluation, who really suffered. Which people among the elites had their own reasons for.
He doesn't seem to have a problem with the average person losing money and then having the elites. You know, he's on some weird sick experiment ride. Most people will say that because nobody else reports it, and so it allows it the vacuum. The silence allows this to seem like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. He's done this very thing in 5 different countries. They don't understand how much money he is making right now. While everybody else is crashing, he's getting rich because he is in the White House over and over and over and over again, and all his people are designing these policies. He's not that much of a genius. He's controlling the policies, or at least suggesting many of the policies that make him rich. They will say, your friends will say, well, then what does he want? And they always fall back to an open society. If you tell your friend that he wants an open society, they may not say it, but they'll immediately say, well, I'm for an open society too. Could you explain a little what George Soros means by an open society?
I really don't know what he means by it. He claims that he's a follower of the philosopher Karl Popper, who coined this term open society. Supposedly it's all about democracy, free speech, all the things we all believe in enlightened and democratic societies such as this. But obviously, if these were if Mr. Soros's beliefs were as innocent as all that, then what would be the issue? Why would he be going around saying that the United States needs to be denazified, which is something he said a couple years ago? And he's constantly characterizing the United States as a country which has to be denazified, or in some way has to experience one of his bloodless coups, that has to be treated as he treated the Soviet Union, or as he has treated other totalitarian or oppressive regimes around the world. He continually characterizes the United States as a great threat to world peace and a threat to the open society. So we're the country of George Washington, the subject of your recent book. We're the country of the American Revolution. We're the country of the American Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We're the last best hope of Earth, I think, in the eyes of most people in the world. But in the tiny little intellectual world which George Soros inhabits, we are actually the greatest threat to peace in the world, and we are a country, an actual failed state in George Soros' opinion, a state so hideously evil, so dangerous, so out of control that we cannot, what's wrong with us supposedly cannot be fixed through the democratic process. It has to be fixed through the kind of covert interventions which Mr. Soros has used in places like Yugoslavia and Slovakia and Russia and Ukraine and so forth and so on. This is why Mr. Soros has targeted our country for these types of covert activities.
He is also at the same time,
because he believes this.
He's also at the same time, he's put up, I mean, you call it the shadow party. I'd like you to answer to the name here for a second, because that's not a smear. The shadow party, but he's also putting together a whole shadow government. I mean, he is redesigning all of the financial laws all around the world at the same time. True or false?
Yes, he is. He has a very well-developed theory of how the world should work. He believes, of course, in globalism, although sometimes he denies that he believes in globalism. He believes that we should create a new, essentially a central bank for the entire world, which issues a global currency, which should replace the dollar as the dominant currency on the earth. He has written this in his books. He has a very, very clearly laid out plan for globalizing the planet. And a big part of this plan, one might even say the biggest part of this plan, as he states very clearly, is to break the power of the United States, which he sees as the one force which is strong enough and stubborn enough and sufficiently in love with its own independence to try to stop this from happening.
Is he a guy who is so naive that he really thinks that he can get into bed with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic world? Is he using them, or are they using him, or do they both think we'll use each other temporarily and then we'll off the other? We'll split the world or whatever. How does he think he's going to fare with the Islamic world afterwards? I don't think he'll fit into Sharia finance real well.
No, I don't imagine he would, but I would guess that, I can only guess, but I would guess that Mr. Soros and people like him, the sort of people who are gathering now at the Davos World Economic Forum in Switzerland to make these plans for globalization as we speak, these sorts of people see the Muslim world very much as the old colonial powers used to see it. You know, you can read books that were written during the era of the French Empire and the British Empire, both of which ruled large Muslim populations. And they used to talk about how to manage the Muslims, almost the way you'd manage a type of livestock. That they're useful for this, sometimes they're useful for that. Yes, sometimes they get very fanatical and then you have to crack down on them, but you can use them to keep other people under control. And you can actually read these books, many of them are still in print today, manuals of colonialism. And I think the elites like Soros today are still reading from that book, that old book of colonialism, and thinking, well, the Muslims are just a part of our kingdom. They're just a segment of our, they're subjects of our empire, and they have certain uses. We can use them for this, or we can not use them for that. The Muslims, on the other hand, those who are true believers, they see this, they see everything that happens to their advantage as the hand of providence, as the hand of Allah. They don't care what Soros and people like that think when they help them. They say, look, the infidels are helping us. Allah has made them mad. He's brought them into our hands. And so at one point or another, these forces will collide, certainly.
Okay, one last question. The average person, you watch George Soros. I know, because boy, I mean, I made such a great case on George Soros and everything. You know this because you've done it. You cannot make a case on George Soros unless it is 100% buttoned up. You cannot I mean, that's why they went after me and he called me an anti-Semite. I mean, that's all he had. I lay out days and days and days and days of worth of stuff, and he goes after anti-Semite? I mean, a guy with the attorneys and the power of George Soros, you don't go after that way. So you have to be extraordinarily careful. No one is riding in because I stood alone, I know. It was the last test for me. Can a man tell the truth and have any journalist, any company actually stand up and say, I stand with him because he's made a point. He's right, and he has a right to say it. The answer to that is no. You have to do it on your own. The question, however, is the elites aren't going to help. The media is not going to help. The networks aren't going to help. What does the average person do with George Soros and this information? What do you do?
Well, I think the important thing is to understand what they're doing, first of all. And if I may, I just put a couple of things on the chalkboard here.
Sure.
If I could just
Okay.
briefly illustrate. I learned this from you, Glenn, of course.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go through all of it. But
Go ahead.
I think the answer to your question is to if we understand, if the average person simply understands what Mr. Soros is doing, it begins to become obvious what can be done to stop it. And it's really a very simple process. The key to understanding what's happening now is to understand the past, because in history things tend to happen over and over again. And in the case of Mr. Soros especially, and I've watched him for many years, he keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again. He started with little countries like Czechoslovakia in 1979. He did it in Croatia and Slovakia and Yugoslavia and Ukraine and Tajikistan and Russia even. He did these bloodless coups, which are sometimes called color revolutions. Sometimes they're called velvet revolutions. They're bloodless coups whereby he has a particular technique of enacting regime change, of overthrowing a country without actually having to usually put armies in the street with guns, although that has happened too in places like Tajikistan and Serbia and so forth. But I believe that if we want to understand why is Mr. Soros carrying on the way you were describing before about Europe right now. Usually we're used to public figures telling us to calm down and not worry and remain calm, do what you're told, don't panic. And here we have Mr. Soros telling us the world is coming to an end. He wants us to panic. He's saying that Europe is going over a cliff. Well, he's done this before. He's trying to make us think that Europe is going over a cliff, that the euro is going to collapse. And the result of this will be he's done it before in so many countries. This is Soros' strategy for attacking currencies. He spreads panic, which he's doing right now through the media. He goes to the press and he'll talk down the currency, as he's currently doing in Europe right now, talking down the whole concept of the European Union, talking down individual nations such as Greece, saying they're going down the tubes, encouraging people to dump those currencies or to dump investments in them. That's step two. The investors will dump the currency or they'll get out of the target country.
The
currency collapses or the country collapses, and then hyperinflation sets in often. And at that point, Soros and his crony capitalists then often move in at this point and they buy up all kinds of valuable property cheap because it's all hyperinflated. They did this in Russia in 1992 when inflation went to 2,500%, and they went in there and bought up all kinds of properties. Mr. Soros himself bought up an oil company, bought shares in an oil company called Sidanko in Russia with oil deposits comparable to Mobil Oil. And for many years, people didn't even know this. He was going around saying he was making no such purchases in Russia. So if we look at what Soros has done in Russia and places like that, it seems to follow this pattern. It's just 3 steps. Spread panic, as he's doing right now through the media, get the investors to dump the currency so it becomes worthless, and then go in, the currency collapse, and then he can go in, perhaps buy up the currency cheap or buy up assets denominated in that currency cheap. He and all his minions, They can make money, plus they can destabilize the target country at the same time. They appear to be doing this to Europe as a whole right now, and if Europe falls, the southern countries will fall first, Greece and Portugal and so forth. If they fall, the richer countries, their banks will default, then the contagion will spread to the U.S. because the U.S. Banks have lent a lot of money to those European banks. The U.S. economy then will collapse. There will be riots in the street.
Which he's
Mr.
predicting.
Soros
I know this sounds crazy,
predicted.
but that's what he's predicting.
And then he has also predicted, Mr. Soros has predicted, there will be a government crackdown, a police state-style crackdown as a result of these riots in the streets. And then what do we have coming up? An election, the presidential election this year, which is exactly the kind of scenario over and over in one country after the other where Mr. Soros has made his move. He waits for a presidential election, he destabilizes the country first, and then the country is in chaos when the election comes. He puts his minions into the street and then disrupts the election. Well, whoever gets elected, he says, no, the election was false, we don't accept it. They march through the streets. They usually have connections in the police, in the armed forces, in the intelligence community, and especially in the media, and usually it works. Usually what happens is no matter who was actually elected by the people, the person who...
Richard,
yes.
I just want to stop you here because I want to pick this up with you. Maybe we can have you in next week. I would like you to show me where he has done that with the presidential election. That's one piece of information I have not had. I didn't know that. Because I was watching you on this chalkboard and I'm thinking, I agree with everything until you said, and then the presidential election comes in fall. I'm not sure that it will happen this fast. I have no idea on time, and I'm always wrong on time. So now that I'm saying it's probably going to be slower, it'll probably happen. But I'd like to have you come back next week and talk a little bit about where that has happened before, where it was right before an election, and then show me the cases and his fingerprints that are all over it. Can you do that?
Of course, yes.
Okay, we'll do that next week.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. The name of the book is Shadow Party, and it is it's really worth a read. It is remarkable, the things you don't know about what's going on in our own government.